So, good morning, everybody. First off, thank you very much for joining us this morning for what we're sure is going to be hopefully an insightful webinar on the subjects of SASE. So, I'm going to start off just by making a bit of an educated guess. I don't think anybody's attending today who is here just to try and understand what the cloud actually is. So if that is you, then this is probably not the session for you. I reckon the majority of us are going to be here because you've heard some pretty horrendous horror stories about what can go wrong when you're looking at securing the cloud. And we're not going to delve into the horror stories per se. Generally, it's breach, it costs you money, it costs you time. I think we don't need to say any more than that. But I think there's another group here who are just generally just curious about what SASE is. It's one of the most marketed terms within the cybersecurity industry at the moment. And you're probably interested to understand how that relates to your own cloud infrastructure. And then the third group is a group which I know exists because I've had conversations with a number of you who are on this call already today. And these are people who are concerned about how the current world socio-economic political climate is going to impact not just your cloud infrastructure, but your security posture in general. So hopefully, if we've done our jobs correctly, we should have something for everybody. So before we crack on, just want to make sure I'm setting the expectations correctly. First off, we're going to talk about who's who on the presentation panel, introduce you to everybody that's here. Then I'm going to go totally off topic. We're going to touch upon a review of what's happened in 2022 so far. And the reason we're going to do that is because any security program is really only as valid as it is relevant. And James Preston, who's on the call here today, has got an absolutely wonderful turn of phrase, and I'm sure he's going to use it at some point, which is basically security at the speed of relevance. And it's so true. If you're considering augmenting your security approach, then you really need to understand the evolving challenges that are going on around the world, because that's going to build into it. James is then going to start you through your very gentle indoctrination into SASE. He's going to give you the 30,000 foot view. So by the end of this, you should be able to understand what SASE is, what it isn't, when is the tipping point of your cloud journey for when you should seriously be considering a SASE approach. And he's also going to look at a few use cases and who this will benefit as well. We're then going to go and look at the what's in it for you part. And what we mean by that is, what are the business benefits of SASE? And we're going to do that with a lens of Palo Alto networks. Why Palo? Well, for those of you that know us really well, you'll be aware that we are pretty fiercely vendor agnostic. We are good at some things. We are excellent at many others. However, the technology has to be right for the scenario. But when a vendor really nails it, then we do generally tend to let you know. And I think when it comes to SASE, Palo have done a really, really, really great job. And that leads us on to the last part, which is actually going and having a look at some technology as well. So we should have some time for some questions at the end. So if you have questions, you can use the comment section within the Zoom console, or you can fire me over an email, which is rpage@ansecurity.com. So who's who? I'm going to start things off. My name's Richard Page. I'm a director here over at AN Security. I've been with the business for around about 2 years, and I've got many hats that I wear here. And one of them is managing our vendor relationships. And it's a great position to be in because I'm privileged to be able to see, what vendors are doing, what's good and what's bad across a whole range of technology, and particular when it comes to SASE over the last 6 months. And you would be pleased to say we're just going to focus on the good stuff today. So, James, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Rich. I'm James Preston. I'm a security consultant here at AN Security. And I've been working with Rich and the rest of the team to evaluate new technologies and, of course, deploy those new technologies, one of which has been SASE over the last couple of years. Thank you very much, Rich. I'll hand over to Adam.
Thank you, James. Morning, everyone. Adam Legg from Exclusive Networks here. I'm a security consultant in our team. I've been working with Palo Alto Technologies for 12 years. So from the early days up to the modern SASE platform that we'll hopefully show you some of later.
Fantastic. Thanks, gents. So as I mentioned at the start, we're going to start off going totally off script. And the reason being is because the wider economic and political climate drives the behavior of our threat actors. And it's that behavior of this enemy which we've really got to be informing our strategy with, our mitigation plan. We've got to go and make sure that we have an actionable plan against them. So, there's no prizes for guessing where we're going to start. There's some clues on the screen here. We are going to talk about Ukraine. There's pretty horrendous news that comes down every night on the TV screens when I get home, and clearly the impact is focused on Ukrainian citizens themselves. However, it's just like throwing a big rock into a lake. The impact ripples way beyond the Ukrainian border, and since the invasion started, we've seen sanctions, and that's fueled a fuel crisis, an energy crisis. There is an emerging refugee crisis that's happening. We've got food prices increasing and a general feeling of concern about events escalating. Now, if you layer on top of that, we've also got the added vector of an increase in cyber threats. All of that is directly correlated to what's happening in Ukraine. Now, in 2022, none of us are naive. We work in the security industry. We know that wars are no longer just conducted with soldiers with big guns. Nation states are fully aware that they're able to achieve their objectives by disrupting the daily lives of people who live in countries that are way beyond their borders. And they do this through nation state sponsored cyber attacks. Bombs, bullets, they're all really expensive. They can be intercepted, they require planning, they require logistics, intelligence, and armies required feeding. Cyber attacks can be launched really quickly. They are very cheap to deploy. You can do it continuously, globally, against a range of targets. So I think what you're probably thinking is, what is the impact to us in the UK? The UK is 1,500 odd miles away from Ukraine. Well, as you can see on screen here, if you believe the press, the world is absolutely 100% going to end imminently. The NHS is going to be crippled. The pumps will run dry. No food. It's going to be bedlam. But, what actually is the reality? How concerned should we be as security leaders within the UK economy? And we know that this is something that you guys are getting asked as security leaders continuously. The conversations, probably for the first time in quite some time, certainly since the start of the pandemic, are happening right at the boardroom level. And these questions are being asked of you, the security leaders, and it comes down to us. So what I'm going to do here is sort of pull together packets of information and useful sources that you can use to be able to go and answer some of those questions. And one piece that I found which is really useful, or one guy I should say, is Bill Woodcock from the Packet Clearinghouse. And the graphic you can see on screen here is really simple, and it's freely out there. And it essentially shows you the volume of attacks against infrastructure in the Ukraine and neighboring countries. In this instance, it's Poland, and it compares it to other areas. And in this instance, it's the rest of Europe. I genuinely really recommend going and having a look at this guy. He's got some fantastic stuff. He publishes stuff quite frequently, and it's very handy if you're looking at pulling together a business case or you want an external source to be able to substantiate what you know is already out there. So going back to this, what does this tell us? Well, this image is just a random 48-hour period in March. Obviously, the yellow and the blue line refers to the Ukraine, and that is pretty much off the charts, as you can see here. But Poland is not a million miles behind, and that is generally at this point between the 7th and the 9th of March. This is when you had the the Ukrainian refugees that were moving over the border into Poland. And Poland is actually tracking about 10 times higher than the rest of the European average. So Ukraine very high, Poland very, very high, Europe 10 times less than Poland. So, what's really the problem then? If it's 10 times higher than the European average, what does that really mean for the UK? Well, when we look at the UK specifically, we are seeing significant increases across all of our critical markers, and the evidence is there right in front of our face. So what you can see on screen here is a really, really simple report, about as simple as it can get. And this is from the AN Security's own firewall. And it shows us the volume of probes against our public address space in a 24-hour period right before the invasion started, so back in February. And this is basically, threat actors having a poke around, looking for things to explore. And you're not going to see anything that you're not really expecting here. It's pretty much business as usual, both in terms of the volume of attempts and location of where these are coming from. So USA is at the top, pretty standard. Russia is about 50% of the total. Yeah, it's kind of what we would expect. So the invasion happens 72 hours later, and it's a totally different picture. Russia has increased its rate by more than 500%. And these figures are actually probably on the low side here, as they were taken on a Sunday. And notoriously, Saturday and Sunday is a slow day for the threat actors, because, you know, these nation state sponsored threat actors, they're office workers. They work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5:30, like the majority of us. They don't tend to be working the weekend. So actually, we would expect these numbers would be higher during the week. But this significant increase is just something that we've experienced, not just something that we've experienced here at AN Security. If we go and do the same analysis across our managed firewall customers, which we have over exactly the same period, we see significant increases. And we've got one well-known university customer who over exactly the same period, they increased, or their figures increased by around about 1,200%. And that increase is something that has increased significantly ever since. So, you know, generally the threat is out there, and you've got the own analysis with your own technology that you can use to be able to answer those questions. And the future trend is that this is just going to increase. So, you know, we've probably all seen the statement from President Biden. Yeah, the White House is clearly saying that state-sponsored cyber attacks, they are now part of the Russian playbook. And the intelligence is that Russia are actively exploring options for potential cyber attacks. And that's the sentiment that is reiterated by GCHQ, NCSC, Number 10, all of the typical sources over here in the UK. But surely, you know, these cyber threat actors, when they are targeting a country, they're going to be aiming for the national infrastructure. Well, no, they're really not. Clearly, that's something that is a target. But in the main, they're looking at the enterprise. And there's another guy here, which I think is really worthwhile looking into, Mike Maguire. He's a lecturer over at University of Surrey, and he's probably the leading voice on cyber conflicts in the UK. And certainly when it comes to being able to sort of guide on the path of the money and where it goes to. And his research shows that when it comes to nation state sponsored attacks, it is the enterprise which is impacted the most. And it's really quite simple when you think about it, because it all just comes down to money. You know, it turns out that directing your cyber efforts at the private sector is actually a pretty profitable business. They're generally covered by some level of insurance, which is the first point. The second point is, you know, in the private sector, you don't want the publicity. So you've generally got a proclivity to pay ransomware. And the third point is there are lots of holes. And there are lots of holes irrespective of what sector you're in, but they know that within the private sector. And one of those holes, and one which is not talked about frequently, is this concept of shadow IT. And shadow IT is loosely defined, and I'm going to use the loose definition because it's probably the best one. But basically, shadow IT is IT projects, solutions, devices which are outside of or without the knowledge of the IT department. They're managed without the knowledge of the IT department. And, you know, I know what you're probably thinking, well, that absolutely doesn't happen here. I've asked people who look after our infrastructure, and no, that doesn't happen. Well, I'm going to challenge everybody who has that view, because if your company has got employees, then you absolutely have a challenge with regards to shadow IT. And why is that? Well, it comes down to the C word. It comes down to cloud. The cloud makes it so easy for departmental heads, budget holders, even just rank and file users to be able to go and spin up and consume services that then evolve very quickly into core line of business applications. And those core line of business applications have got mission critical data. They have company secrets, and it's out there in the ether and you don't know about it. And visibility is everything, and you really can't secure what you don't know about. So shadow IT is a massive problem. So, you know, how do we categorize shadow IT? Well, you know, it's obvious really. You've got the allowed devices and applications. These are the ones that are typically procured by, or certainly rubber stamped by IT. They are provided. You then move down to what we call tolerated. And these are applications which aren't provided by IT, but they are allowed with some level of restriction. And then right at the bottom of the food chain, we've got those unsanctioned devices. And these are the applications or devices which they're just not allowed, and they've got to have some sort of mitigation put in place to be able to go and control their uses. So, yeah, you've got a bunch of questions that you really need to be going asking yourself, your colleagues, your business. Things like, are we explicitly clear as to what our sanctioned, tolerated, and unsanctioned applications and devices are? What is our justification for an application being classed in the way it is? Just because something was classed as sanctioned 2 years ago, 6 months ago, does that mean it should be sanctioned today? How frequently do we go back and assess this list? And I think the most pertinent one, and where we all need to get a lot better at, is, are we really honest with ourselves? And do we go and have those really difficult conversations with our colleagues, often ones which are sitting right at the very top tables of the organizations which we secure? And do we challenge them to ensure that they are really adhering to our guidance? It's kind of a rhetorical question, really, because the evidence clearly shows it's not really the case. 80% of end users are using cloud software as part of their day-to-day job every single day. And that is 80% of people not using sanctioned or using unsanctioned devices or applications, things that aren't approved by the IT function. But we can't really say a lot, because in IT, we're slightly worse off. We're 83% of us that use unsanctioned cloud software or services every single day. And it really comes down to visibility again. You can't secure what you can't see. And only 8% of us are able to really, truly evidence that we understand the scope of the IT challenge, or the shadow IT challenge. And that is not 8% of us who don't have a shadow IT problem. That's not what we're saying. There's only 8% of us that actually know the scale of what that challenge is. But what's this all got to do with SASE? Well, it's a myriad of effects, really, and it's pretty much an iceberg. So, we've seen on one hand, we're experiencing a significant period of political and economic uncertainty. We've got nation state cyber threats, which are increasing exponentially day on day on day. And we've got no idea when that's going to end. Probably never. But it's not just the core nation infrastructure that's impacted. You've got threat actors who are predominantly financially driven. They want our money. They want our valuable data. And they know that with cloud, it brings the unknown into our environments. And as we said a number of times, we can't secure what we don't know about. So they understand that visibility is a key weapon in their arsenal that they've got. And that's really just the top of the iceberg, because what it really comes down to is it is more expensive to be the victim of a cloud breach than it is for an on-premise equivalent. The financial and productivity implications are significantly higher. Now, the purpose of this webinar is not to be able to sort of debate, is a cloud infrastructure more secure than a hybrid or an on-prem? It really comes down to how you deploy it, and what your strategy and approach is. However, the one thing which is irrefutably the case is that cloud breaches take more time to get back to a business as usual state. So we've got 329 days for a cloud breach versus 287 for an on-prem equivalent. And they are more expensive as well. So 4.28 million sterling for a cloud application versus 3.5 million for an on-prem. So this is kind of a lot of the factors that have been driving the vendor appetite for SASE solutions. And this is probably why you looked at your LinkedIn feed and it just says SASE, SASE, SASE. So I think it's useful to have a listen to James and really understand about what is that 30,000 foot view of SASE and what can it mean to how you go about securing your cloud infrastructure. James, I'm going to stop sharing, hand over to you.
Cheers. So let's have a look at the 30,000 foot view of SASE. What does it actually mean? How can we actually apply it inside our environments? And if we start here with a short story as to how our internet traffic flows, how our traffic flows between our remote users, our HQ, and the broader internet looked in the before times, so pre-COVID. And this Venn diagram here on the left might look familiar to you. So we have our remote users, they connect to the corporate VPN at the HQ site. That's where we go and apply our security technologies, of course. That's where we do our URL filtering, our content inspection, and the likes. And of course, a certain quantity of that traffic is going to flow through the HQ site out to the internet, and the larger majority of it might be accessing on-premise applications, even if it's just simple file servers, for instance. Of course, the pandemic comes along, everyone gets sent home, and we continue to rely on our traditional network infrastructure. We continue to rely on our setup that we had in the before times. And of course, this starts to bring about some new challenges, in particular for those organizations which then started to adopt new SaaS services, perhaps even just Microsoft Teams and Zoom calls, for instance, which can be very bandwidth intensive when it comes to the high fidelity audio and video streams that they can kick out. So of course, the traffic flow then starts to change, and the quantity of traffic destined for the HQ itself, as far as the on-premise applications, begins to dwindle somewhat. Our users start to adopt perhaps Dropbox or Office 365 for their file sharing needs as well. And so the amount of traffic being tunneled, the amount of traffic being inspected at the HQ sites and going out to the internet increases. This starts to bring about some bottlenecks, of course, though. This starts to bring about the limitations that we might have on the bandwidth and throughput of our internet circuits, or perhaps even just start to introduce problems with latency. And of course, very early on inside the pandemic, we were speaking to organizations that were just out of a matter of necessity having to start to resort to split tunneling. And this is where perhaps the Teams and the Zoom video content gets shipped out from the remote users straight to the internet, and without having to go through the main site, without having to go through the data center or HQ, of course. But then as the bandwidth requirements grew, as more and more services are adopted, in particular those hosted on the internet, we start to reach the stage of what we might call a full split tunnel. And this is where all of our traffic that's destined for the internet breaks out locally. And at that point, that visibility aspect that Rich was mentioning earlier there gets completely lost. We no longer have a view as to what traffic is going from our remote users out to the internet. And of course, that then drops our ability to go and enforce security policy, our ability to go and control what applications, not just our users, but also the threat actors that might have compromised a user's machine, have access to. And of course, here we've got a very relevant Dilbert cartoon that's been adapted ever so slightly, where the boss man is asking why, by simply moving to the cloud, we haven't automatically solved all our problems. And of course, the same can be applied to our remote access services. If we just continue to adopt the same network infrastructure, adopt the same stance, the same way of doing things as we had in the before times, just by wrapping things up in technical terms like containers and Kubernetes, is not going to solve our problems. We need to re-architect, we need to reconsider how we can be cloud native, how we can provide the appropriate connectivity to our users for the types of traffic that they're actually accessing and going through. So here I introduce the new Venn diagram, the don't let your data take the scenic route diagram, in essence, where instead of just all our security technologies being applied at our HQ site, we also apply those security technologies up to the traffic that's going out to the internet. And of course, this is effectively our cloud firewall. This is our SASE platform, which brings a whole lot more benefits than just a simple VPN. So in these situations, of course, we then maintain our visibility. We have a visibility over the traffic that's not just going to the HQ site, but also the traffic that's going out there to the internet. And we have the ability to apply consistent security services no matter where our users are. And this also brings about some side benefits as well. So reducing latency for all the users' traffic by making the decisions as to which the most appropriate VPN endpoint is to connect out to, which the most appropriate SASE endpoint the user needs to connect out to. So if we look at SASE as a whole, it's a true combination of a number of different technologies that you might already have deployed in your organizations, a number of different security services that you might already have deployed in your organizations to go and access those applications in the top of the diagram. Be they simple internet web browsing applications, be it access into your public clouds hosted on Azure, AWS, and the Google Compute Service, for instance, perhaps even just your SaaS applications, or just looking at those HQ and data center applications, be they on-premise applications or simple file servers, for instance. And when it comes to connecting into those different applications, SASE is not just applicable to those users working from home, those users working from coffee shops and on their mobile devices, but it's also applicable to our branch sites, our retail stores as well, by ensuring that the traffic from those sites, instead of going over expensive MPLS links to be connected back to the data center, we can plug those services into a SASE platform and again, make those intelligent decisions as to what the most appropriate endpoint is to send the traffic out to. And SASE begins to introduce some new technology areas to us here. And one of them is Autonomous Digital Experience Management, otherwise known as ADEM. And this gives us the ability to inspect the quality of the user's internet connection, the quality of their Wi-Fi connection, such that when a user gets in touch and says, this application isn't working for me and I can't reach out to the internet, we can positively establish, is it the SaaS service that's at fault? Is it our SASE platform perhaps that's at fault? Is it the user's internet connection, or as we all too often see, their home Wi-Fi connection that truly is at fault here? And Adam is going to give us a demonstration as to how that platform looks like a little bit later in this webinar. So who is SASE right for? Which organizations are right for adopting a SASE stance at various levels, of course? So first, and perhaps most obviously, those organizations which have pushed hard into cloud services. If you have more than perhaps, let's say 50% of your application data now being hosted on cloud services, and that might be simple things like Office 365 and Dropbox, for instance, a SASE platform is going to be right for you. And this way we can ensure that instead of backhauling all that traffic to our HQs, to our main sites, we offload it to the SASE platform instead. And of course, that SASE platform is a very flexible platform as well, being cloud delivered. So if you need to increase the amount of bandwidth, that's possible with a couple of clicks with an appropriate contact, of course. Of course, those users who are working from home, as we've already discussed, if you've still got the large majority of your workforce working from home, SASE can be right for you too. And here we have the ability to contain those cloud security breaches. We have the ability that if a user's machine is compromised, we can maintain that visibility. And even then, I ask, if you have brought the large quantity of your users home, now's the time to see, are you still doing split tunneling? Are you still lacking that visibility? And perhaps is it time to go back to full tunnel connections, or maybe just break out to the internet locally for audio and video streams instead? As I mentioned earlier, of course, those remote sites as well are entirely applicable to SASE, and Adam again is going to give us a short demonstration later as to how we can connect in those remote sites. And perhaps if you've already adopted SD-WAN, for instance, to ensure that your users at the remote sites always get the best connectivity experience by layering SASE over the top of that, we can ensure that those users also get the best security experience as well. And finally, those organizations that wish to ensure that their users have a seamless access to their services, no matter where they are, SASE can be right as well. And one of the important things for any SASE platform is to ensure that it can integrate with not just your cloud applications, but also your on-premise applications as well. And that way we can write policy in one single location and say, these are the applications our users need access to, write that one single policy, really simplifying things for the IT administrators. Now, I've mentioned security a couple of times in the past there, and Rich has as well, but what do we actually mean by security? What's the nitty-gritty of it, as it were? And of course, security starts out with visibility. We can't go and control the application traffic. We can't go and control access to these services, be they SaaS applications, be they Netflix applications, for instance, and the likes, if we don't have that visibility. And SASE starts by ensuring that at the network level, we have visibility as to where our traffic is actually flowing. Next up is then attack surface reduction. And all too often we see organizations continue to publish web portals out to the internet, and perhaps these web portals haven't been patched in some time. In addition, by the continued expansion and adoption of SaaS applications as well, each of these will have their own login endpoints. Each of these will have their own entry points for users to gain access to the data. And a good and great SASE platform like that provided by Palo Alto Networks will be able to hook into these so that we can ensure the only entry point into those on-premise applications, the only entry point into those cloud-hosted applications is through the SASE platform. Next up, we then have identity. And when we're looking at identity, we're not just looking at the user. We're not just looking at applying good old-fashioned multi-factor authentication, but also ensuring we've checked the health of the device that the user is actually accessing the data from. And these health checks need to be built into the SASE platform such that we can make policy decisions on them. So perhaps if a user isn't using a device which has got BitLocker drive encryption, perhaps if that machine isn't Microsoft Intune or Microsoft Endpoint Manager registered, you then don't get access to particularly sensitive data. And all of this is possible with the right SASE platform. Next up is content inspection. So you might already, of course, have these technologies deployed on your on-premise infrastructure already. So that's the decryption of traffic flows, so we can inspect encrypted payloads for malicious content, URL filtering, and the likes as well. And the thing I'm stressing here is that we're doing this at the network level. So instead of relying on agents that might be installed on users' computers, agents which might be disabled by the correct threat actors, of course, we're doing this at the network level so that we can always have that visibility. And of course, prevention is the final step of any good security posture. We need to ensure that not just we detect these threats, not that we just detect and stop these threats, that we have the ability to get some actionable information out of them as well. And we'll have a closer look at that in just a couple of minutes' time. So when it comes to visibility in a bit more detail here, visibility really gets broken down into the sanctioned, tolerated, and unsanctioned applications. So here I've got a small screenshot from the Palo Alto Networks SASE platform for a single user's connections out to various applications over a 24-hour period. And we can see here that they've been doing a fair quantity of Zoom meetings, and perhaps that, of course, is a sanctioned application for our organization. So that's okay, Zoom meetings can continue. And of course, we've seen them reach out to Windows Update, as we might expect them to do on that computer, and of course, Office Web Online, otherwise known as Office 365. And perhaps as part of our acceptable use policy, or just agreed with the users on general, that in their off hours, they can access other applications like Netflix, YouTube, and Google. But as we can see on the left-hand side there are a couple of potentially unsanctioned applications which have no business purpose whatsoever, and applications which might even open up the organization to some measure of compromise, be it the Steam gaming service or the TikTok video service, which of course we know where that data is truly being hosted these days. When it comes to attack surface reduction, of course, we've all heard about the scourge of open to the internet public Amazon AWS S3 buckets, but as something here that you can do a lot more practically, as something that you can do straight after the end of this webinar, for instance, is to head to the website Virus Total and plug in your fully qualified domain name for your organization's public website. Head over to the Relations tab, and what you'll see there is a list of all the domains which at some point have been affiliated with that root domain. And again, a good and great SASE platform will have the ability to ensure that instead of having all those public services published out to the internet and instead of having all those services accessible by the threat actors, that there is one single place to go and protect them from, and that's the SASE platform. And if you aren't authenticated to the SASE platform, if you aren't on a device that's being health checked, if you aren't matching the policies that have been defined by the administrator at the network level, you don't get any access to those systems to potentially compromise them. When it does come to identity, we've even seen instances now where a SASE platform has been used to wrap multi-factor authentication around legacy web applications, legacy web portals. So those applications which perhaps only integrate with LDAP, for instance, or perhaps even only host their own internal database. through some networking magic that we can perform with the SASE platforms from Palo Alto Networks, we can actually wrap that application up such that you need to pass an MFA prompt before you gain access to it. Again, really helping to secure our environments, ensure that only trusted, identified users can actually get to those applications. And it's also about the universal application of health checking, ensuring that no matter what device the user is on, that they've got a valid antivirus software installed on it, that the device is encrypted with BitLocker drive encryption before they go and access potentially sensitive financial information, or indeed those users accessing your data from their Android phones, from their iOS devices, that they're not jailbroken perhaps as well. And a SASE platform will enable us to go and write these policies in the rules to ensure that only users on a trusted, sanctioned device have access to your sensitive data. And of course, can then attribute that traffic flow back to the individual users as well. So instead of having multiple consoles to go and see what a user has done over the course of the last 7 days or the last 30 days, for instance, we've got one single place where we can attribute all of the traffic back to individual users on individual devices. When it comes to content inspection, what we see here is a lot of organizations who have pushed to split tunneling start to adopt endpoint agents to perform these kind of network level security protections. But the problem with a lot of these endpoint agents is that they can be disabled, is that they can be bypassed, is there are mechanisms for threat actors to actually go and compromise those endpoint agents and use them for their own malicious purposes. And the goal of a SASE platform is to provide these content inspection services, to provide these prevention and detection technologies at the network level, as a mechanism that the threat actors won't be able to detect in the first place, in a mechanism that the threat actors won't be able to exploit for their own particular gains and purposes. And when I refer to content inspection, of course, we start out with decryption. If we're not doing decryption, a significant volume of the traffic that's going over your users' internet connections is completely hidden to you. We need to inspect inside those malicious payloads, for malicious content, whilst also applying traditional technologies like URL filtering to block access to the known bad websites, and also their advanced cousins as well, their advanced new technologies where we can dynamically analyze a website and establish if it's malicious in near real time. This also gives us the opportunity to apply network-based data loss prevention as well. And again, this is applied universally, regardless of what device the user is actually on. They could be on their corporate sanctioned laptop, they could be on their own personal mobile phone. And so long as they're connected to the SASE platform to access that data, we've got the one single enforcement point instead of having multiple technologies spread out all over the place with multiple places for us to go and investigate them in the event that something goes wrong. And of course, when it comes to prevention, this is the bit where we need to move with security at the speed of relevance. And all too often, we see organizations log the number of threats that have been prevented, the number of times that a user has accessed a malicious URL or perhaps attempted to visit a website which doesn't use HTTPS, or even just a threat actor on a machine attempting to exfiltrate data. Just stopping at that threat being prevented by the firewall, by the VPN service, by the SASE platform is not enough. We need to ensure that administrators are informed and perhaps automated services employed such that that machine or that user's account can be isolated from the rest of the network whilst the security team goes and formulates their response. And of course, a SASE platform, by having all that data in a single location, is going to be really easy for that security team to establish the root cause, establish what the initial mechanism of compromise was on that machine. And I've even now seen instances where administrators have actually plugged their SASE platforms into technologies like KnowBe4, so that if a user visits a significant quantity of phishing websites or malicious websites over a period of time, their risk score, their personal identity's risk score can be increased. And perhaps the next time that phishing training comes along, they can be particularly targeted to ensure that they're not going to be vulnerable, such that we can enhance security for everyone. And again, finally, by having all this information in one single place, we can start to generate our own threat intelligence. We can start to establish which the originating countries of threat actors are actually coming from, what their actions are, and what perhaps their goals are as well, so that, again, we can tune our security response over time, especially at periods like we have now, where Rich mentioned earlier, where we truly are in a new age of cyber warfare. So to wrap up from me, before I hand over to Adam, I've got a few closing points, a few areas of thinking back over the last couple of years where we've been deploying these SASE platforms and the pitfalls and traps that some organizations have fallen into, and to avoid those, of course. And the first point that I'd like to highlight is ensuring that you don't end up with a SASE platform that doesn't interoperate with your on-premise applications, that doesn't interoperate with your cloud applications. And perhaps you end up with multiple management platforms, multiple places for you to go and look at the logs. This isn't a situation we want to fall into, because it then stops us having that a single consistent place for us to go and receive security alerts from, which then, of course, makes it much harder to adopt automation, to adopt features like having that technology I mentioned earlier, where a user's risk score can be increased, and so the individual's training requirements can also be increased to match that. And the final trap which I see organizations falling into is those organizations which adopt client endpoint applications which don't account for the full range of traffic types that a user is actually going to be using through the course of the day, or perhaps that a threat actor might go and exploit. And these are the platforms that just do DNS filtering, just do URL filtering, whilst they miss out common technologies like FTP, for instance. And we have seen instances where threat actors have realized that organizations aren't securing every single traffic type, and they go and use FTP as an exfiltration mechanism. They go and use these older technologies, which are very dependable, very reliable when set up correctly, of course, as mechanisms for exfiltrating data. Thinking about even more recent compromises that I've seen and widely reported in the news as well, we've seen even Discord, a messaging application, being used as a mechanism to go and deliver malware to a user's machine by hosting it on their content delivery networks. And again, a SASE platform which provides the visibility that you need to go and see these different traffic types will allow you to then write policies to say, these are the applications which are permitted. And by the way, FTP and Discord messaging services, we've got no legitimate reason for them in our applications, in our environments. Let's go and block access to them and really start to gain the upper hand when it comes to these sophisticated threats which are now targeting us. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand over to Adam now to give us a demonstration on the Palo Alto Networks SASE platform. Adam, over to you.
Cool. Thank you very much, James. Let me get my screen share sorted. So that should be viewable now. Right, lovely. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. So what you're looking at right now is the dashboard for Prisma Access. So this is where we can create our security policies for those remote users, for those remote networks that we might have out there as well. And there's two ways of managing Prisma Access. So if you already are a Palo Alto Networks firewall customer, you have Panorama. That is one way to manage it. The other way is through this cloud-hosted interface. And when we log in, we give you a quick summary of what is happening with our deployment. So no open alerts at the moment, which is fantastic. And we can see here that we've got a couple of remote networks, a few mobile user locations onboarded, and also what we call service connections, which are connections back to our data center, right? Whether that's a physical data center, whether that's in a public or private cloud somewhere, and how we provide this connectivity. So for the service connections and remote networks is simply IPsec tunnels. And that could be a device you already have on site at the moment that's capable of creating IPsec tunnels, create the IPsec tunnel into our cloud platform, and that's how we get that connectivity. Another way of doing that, as James mentioned earlier, is through SD-WAN. You might already have SD-WAN deployed. We might be looking to move to SD-WAN in the future. We support all vendors for SD-WAN. Palo Alto, we have our own SD-WAN platform as well that probably provides some onboarding benefits and some visibility benefits that we can't do with third parties, but we are open, kind of agnostic on which provider you choose to bring into Prisma Access. If I scroll down, I can also see here just sort of what sort of traffic have we been seeing in some of the use cases that James mentioned earlier. Our remote networks talking back to our internal networks, so either talking to other remote networks, branches, offices, or talking back to the data center via Prisma Access. We can secure that. remote networks talking out to the internet, so talking out to those SaaS applications, or just some resource out on the internet as well. And same for mobile users talking back to our data centers, our remote networks, and mobile user traffic from their home, from the coffee shop, from the other place they work from, out to the internet, out to Office 365 or whatever website it is or application they are using. So how do we connect mobile users in? Just to cover that off, we use a VPN client that we install on the device. There are some other methods that we can use, like explicit proxy, but the VPN client is our favorite way. It allows us to secure all apps, all ports, all protocols, not just web-based traffic. If you're familiar with Palo Alto networks, you might have used the Global Protect client before. You can see I've got that installed here. I'm currently connected into our UK region, our UK presence, and one of these is the UK. And what I can do, if I always want to connect into that region, I can mark that as a favor. I just tick this box here, or I have the option, if I need to connect to one of the other gateways available. You see here, we've got a fairly small deployment, which is a couple of gateways, but we do have clients that use this worldwide. So we have 110 locations across almost 80 countries. So wherever your users are based, the security is always right next to that user in country, giving them that local language experience, and the same for those offices as well. Wherever they're geographically based, there's always a location near to them, so we can provide a quick onboarding point into Prisma Access. And then we can create our policies of what traffic do we want to secure, what do we want to do in terms of like threat prevention, URL filtering, inline DLP, like James mentioned. And once we've got the traffic in, and decryption as well, once we've got the traffic in, we can secure that. Now, being a cloud-based platform, Palo have partnered with Google Cloud and AWS to provide all those locations, and also to provide a lot of the compute behind it. So as you onboard more mobile network, remote networks or mobile users, that compute scales up or can scale out automatically. It's orchestrated automatically. That's handled by Palo Alto. So within 10 to 20 minutes, you can have a new location onboarded very simply. The benefit for that is, well, if we example of one of our largest customers at the start of the pandemic went from around 20,000 remote workers to suddenly 80 and 90,000 remote workers over a couple of days. Right? And as long as we were able to scale out to meet that demand. So from here, you might want to drill down on any of this really to see what's happening. So if I click on here, we'll take us across to just a bit more information around our location. So what's happening for our remote networks. Green is generally good. Red would be bad. If you see that, generally indicates there might be an issue or a problem either with our region or with just the local connectivity. And we can see here that our deployment we're connecting in some remote networks to Ireland and UK, and we're connecting in mobile users in the UK and out in America as well. Again, this can scale up to the 110 locations. We've just got a small deployment happening here. If I want to go down to more details, I'll pick on mobile users, and perhaps I'll change the time frame in a second. There's a couple of different things that we can look at. So first, we can look at things like what agents are installed and what regions people are connecting into as well. What you might want to do is look at that on a map view. It'd be very handy if I expand this back to perhaps the last 24 hours. What we can do is we can look at who's connected in right now and from where they're connected in. So just by selecting a region, I can look and see that I'm actually quite close to that particular region. If I want to go back in time, you can go back up to 30 days in here. If I click here and move us back, what I can actually show is that at certain points we might have had users connected into the US. We've got a little legend down here in the corner, making it a bit more visible. So we can see whether the region is up, whether it needs attention, whether it's down, and also in this case highlighting that these particular users, so my colleague Zach was connected into the US East region for one reason or another, and the color of the line indicates he was from quite far away. So if he's trying to access an application back in the UK, that could have been could of course an issue for them. Now, with remote workers and remote networks, and particularly remote workers, given that they are hiding at home behind equipment that you don't have control of, perhaps it's say local ISP provided commercial grade router, or they're in a coffee shop on shared Wi-Fi. All these things can impact a user experience for the particular application they're trying to use. So we have a feature called Autonomous Digital Experience Management. And we can provide that for the mobile users, and we can also provide that for our remote sites as well. And what that allows us to do is for our remote users, via the same Global Protect agent and through Prisma Access itself, is monitor what that experience of particular applications looks like for those remote users, and be able to score that out of 100. And where we believe the performance is degrading, we will try and highlight to you where we believe that issue is. So you can see here that we're monitoring a handful of applications, most of them performing well, one's performing fair, none are performing particularly poor at the moment. There's a couple of ways you can kind of drill down to look at which application and why we believe it's not performing so well. We can also scroll down here, and we can see for our deployment, all the regions are currently green, so it looks like performance is fairly good. So if there was a red or orange on here, you'd be able to click onto that region and go and have a look at why there might be a particular issue there. One thing I would say as well is that being a cloud hosted service from Palo, it's all backed up with SLAs on the service being available, but also SLAs on the traffic once it arrives in Prisma Access, especially out to a sort of handful of SaaS applications like Office 365 that we provide round-trip time SLAs on. Now, you can see some of the things we're monitoring: the device, the Wi-Fi, the local network, Prisma, the connection to Prisma Access itself, and then the connection onward to whatever the application is. Now, a couple of ways I can sort of have a look at what makes up this 86 of this 92. In my case, I'm going to take the link across here to look at which mobile users are we currently monitoring. So myself and my colleague, we can see where we're connected in from, see what device they're coming in from as well, and which Prisma Access locations they've been connected into. So I use my colleague's, his score's a bit worse than mine. Looks like he's connected from the UK into the US, as we saw from the map earlier. I've starred his name, so his favorite, it'll always appear at the top, no matter how long this list gets. If I click on his name, right, we can now see what those applications are that I've chosen to monitor, I've picked to monitor. So a portal that we use, Teams, Okta, G Suite, Office 365 and Outlook, and they all look to be performing fairly well, considering we saw he chose to connect to America from the UK. Live portal not performing so well. So what can we see here? You can see he was on his home, what looks like his home Wi-Fi network, at least from the name. We can see when he was connected, disconnected, and which location he was connected into. You can see kind of like a baseline, the baseline experience versus this particular application. And then you can see down here, actually, we're highlighting that the issue appears to be with the portal, in particular, the time to last byte, so just how long that's taken to load for him. And what we can do is you can hover over these for a bit more information. In fact, I can show some device details if that's useful to just understand what sort of machine my colleague Zach is using. I can go back to the device as well, understand the device metrics, battery health, memory, CPU. So what we're trying to do with this ADEM feature is answer the questions for your help desk hopefully before a user even knows there's an issue. Sometimes we might be able to fix that, but it might be that it's their home Wi-Fi. Right, and we can drill down into the details of what did their connection look like, signal strength, etc. So we can provide some advice to them if it's local, if it's things beyond our control, if it's a issue from Prisma Access to the portal and it's only in a specific region. I guess the autonomous part is that Palo Alto should be able to fix that or work around that, perhaps steer the traffic via a different region to improve the experience of that particular application. You can go down into things like the path visualization as well. So I can show the hops that have occurred here. So we can see from Zach's local network out to Prisma Access, the steps that have been taken, the routes that's been taken. You can see the ASMs here. You can see the country if you wish. Go back to IP address, just expand that back out again. So you can have a look to see, is the ISP sending you on a strange route for some reason? All information here to help us make sure the user is getting the optimal experience, and if they're not for a particular application, understand why, no matter whether they're at home or at the coffee shop or at a remote site of ours. So mentioned, get back to the start, remote sites, and in particular how we connect those in. We said one of the methods that we've got to connect in our remote networks, well, we use IP select times, and one of the methods that we can use is our SD-WAN solution. So if I jump over into this interface, you can see here that we've got quite a fairly small SD-WAN deployment here, but a few branch offices. And there's also a number of data centers in here that are just hidden from view at the moment. And the color you can see here represents that each site has good connectivity. Right? When these devices are deployed, they will automatically build a VPN back to the data centers. And you can see here, some of them have multiple interfaces, so we'll use those interfaces to build automatically build multiple VPNs back to our data center locations. Right? So we've got full connectivity. What we can then do is use our SD-WAN policies to choose how traffic flows based on the available links, the performance of those links, and the performance of the application over those links as well. So we can start to load balance, share traffic amongst all the available bandwidth, or perhaps a path that's working better for Zoom or Teams or Office 365. And the other paths aren't meeting our quad standards, and we won't use those. So if I drill down into one of these sites, one of the first things I'll just show you up here is we can see that we've got a couple of internet circuits this site, and we'll give you just a quick summary of how that site is performing, the overall site health, the availability of the links and the internet speeds. You see here we've labeled our circuits with a couple of different providers, and we can go down and also just see what those applications are that are being used within this particular network. And you can see there's about 600 applications out of the box that we support, but you can, where POS here is a custom application, you can configure, either based on layer 7 domains or just ports and protocols and IP addresses, any custom applications you might have, so we can understand and apply our policy to that. Now, if I just quickly go across to the configuration tab, we can see as well, we've tagged this branch with Prisma Access. Right? And one of the things that we can do through SD-WAN is we've got this Cloudblaze is our API integrations into third parties, or in this case, integrations into Prisma Access itself. What I can do is just tag the branch with Prisma Access, and the API will work with Prisma Access to onboard this branch to automatically build the VPNs. So in this case, there's 2 internet interfaces. We can build 2 VPNs with ECMP enabled. So we can use both of those circuits to send traffic into Prisma Access, where we can apply our policies, our security. James mentioned things like inline DLP, blocking malicious URLs, threat prevention, all the the firewall technology that it's kind of based on. And we can, you see here, the path policies that are applied. So how do we want that traffic to flow? So we've got a number of different connections, right back to our data centers, out to Prisma Access, and direct to the internet. We've got some default policies that suit most use cases, but you might have something specific where you decide that traffic from a branch needs to go back to the data center. You've got an option there of, do you want to send that via Prisma Access to provide the security? If it's guest traffic at a branch, perhaps you send that directly out to the internet. There's perhaps less requirement to do security on that traffic or send it back to the branch. But you do have those options are all available to you, so you can steer the traffic exactly how you want with active paths. And then if, let's say, Prisma Access becomes unavailable for some reason, perhaps you have a backup path that sends it via the data center or straight out to the internet. I'll show you here in the overlay connections, you can see automatically build the VPNs back to our data center devices using both the ISPs we had available at this site, and we've also automatically built those VPNs, redundant VPNs, back into Prisma Access and the local Prisma Access region in this case. Just another use case while we're here is if you have a particularly dispersed network, branches in different countries and different geographical regions, but you need to get traffic from, let's say, the UK to America or out to Singapore or Hong Kong or somewhere like that. Now, a lot of companies I've spoken to will have a VPN between those sites, but generally that VPN goes across the Wild West of the internet between those locations, and generally user experience latency doesn't look very good. One of the use cases that we could use the SD-WAN and Prisma Access for we connect this branch into the nearest Prisma Access location. So a very local connection. Because Prisma Access is built on Google Cloud and we use their premium fiber network, which is the fastest, biggest fiber network in the world, what we can actually do is then onboard that traffic into Prisma Access, and then Prisma Access becomes the backbone. It becomes that middle mile, the connection between London and Singapore. We travel across that fast fiber network to our Prisma Access location in Hong Kong or Singapore, wherever it is, and then the last mile is taken care of by the SD-WAN. So you can greatly improve that connection between geographically dispersed sites just by using Prisma Access. And at the same time, you can choose to apply security to that traffic as well. Okay, so again, use cases, user out to the internet, the branch out to the internet, branch to branch, branch to data center, and user to data center through a mixture of Prisma SD-WAN and Prisma Access. We're able to secure that traffic if you wish. Just while we're here as well, on the SD-WAN interface, just to give you a bit of an idea of some of the visibility that we can go into. So I've kind of pre-filtered this on our custom application and a particular branch, but we record every transaction and flow that goes through. And what this is particularly useful for, we kind of start to call these graphs, particularly the app response graph, is our sort of like time to innocence graph. So generally where there's a problem with we generally use mostly SaaS applications these days. When there's a problem with an application at a particular time, it can be hard to get the information to Microsoft or whoever the provider is to say, this is the application we have an issue with. This is your IP address of the service at this particular time. Please, can you go and investigate it? That's exactly what we can do through here. So we can drill down into, you can see here at times where server response time, like the particular application we're connecting to is responding poorly. Everything else looks good to us. We've got successful connections, or maybe we've got some failures, but generally it looks like it's the application response time. We can use this to give that information to that SaaS provider, and generally see those tickets with them resolved a lot quicker. It proves that we're the innocent party, because what SaaS providers like to do is blame your network, where generally that's not the case. Anyway, that's a sort of a high level overview of SD-WAN and Prisma Access, which combined create our SASE portfolio. So Rich, I will stop sharing and I'll hand that back to you.
We can start by turning ourselves off mute, Richard. That would help. That was great. Really enjoyed that, Adam. Thank you very much for that. So how can we help? What can we do for you? Well, there's lots of things really, but what I want to do now is just introduce you to what we call the AN Security SASE Maturity Workshop. And this we designed a while back, and it basically helps you to build a plan to becoming, I suppose, as SASE as is relevant for your business. And it really starts with helping you to understand your current maturity level. Now, hopefully, following this session, you should understand that SASE is not a single point solution. It is an approach. And no doubt you've made some investments already in tooling to help improve your cloud security posture. And some of those are going to be absolutely ideal for helping you on your journey to become a true SaaS organization. But without knowing where you currently stand, it's absolutely impossible to be able to go and deliver an effective, actionable plan. And that's what we really need. And that's the purpose of these workshops here. We understand where we are at the moment. We build an idea of what we want the future to look like. We agree what time frame that should be delivered over, and then we can start to build some steps into it. So that's essentially what this workshop delivers. So if you've got a couple of hours of your time, which is typically what we need for something like this, then I think it's going to be really, really valuable. We've run dozens of these over the past 6 months. I think every one that we've delivered without exception has been of real value for all of the participants. We create a report at the end, so you've got something which you can then go and keep referring back to. There's no charge for them. They are complimentary because they're funded by Palo Alto Networks as part of this program. But we've been absolutely clear with Palo, and also with Exclusive as well, that we will only do the AN security thing. So for us, it's still a vendor agnostic workshop. We will only recommend the technology which is right for your particular scenario, and that's fully understood and agreed. So if this is something that you're interested in being involved with, I'd encourage you to go and have a chat with your AN Security account manager, and they can go and get that ball rolling for you. So just one final thing that I want to point you in the direction for, because it's really, really useful. It's a great resource which is provided by Palo, and it's their SASE for Dummies book, and you can go and download this from the Palo website. It's actually just over 12 months old. I think it was March last year it was released, so it doesn't come with some of the stuff around the newer parts of the Palo SASE journey, things like ADEM and so on, but nonetheless it is a really, really useful read. if you are looking for alternative sources to help educate yourself and your colleagues on SASE, then just reach out to your account manager, or you can drop me a line and we'll be able to point you in the right direction. But I hope that's been a useful session. We've got a few questions, I think. Guys, can I fire these at you? Because I think they're probably more you rather than me. Let's put it that way. So, James, one for you. Let's try this. So let's paraphrase. So, can we use SASE to stop users and staff from connecting to our SaaS applications from their home? And by that, I'm guessing that's their home devices.
Yes, entirely. So that's where those device health checks starts to come in. So even if you've got valid credentials, if that machine doesn't pass the health checks, and one of those might be that it is indeed enrolled in your MDM service, or with Microsoft Intune, for instance, you don't get connectivity. But the other side to it, of course, is one of the the great things, or one of the great things for the threat actors at least, is that all these SASE platforms are accessible from the public internet. And the thing to understand there is your traditional SaaS applications will allow anyone to log in so long as they've got valid credentials. But what we can actually do with the Palo Alto Networks platform is tap into their identity and service providers and say that unless you see the traffic coming from the Prisma SASE platform, the Palo Alto Networks SASE platform, don't allow the user to authenticate. That's the point at which we can say only allow those users who are connected to the SASE platform can actually go and log into these publicly available services. So it really helps reduce that attack surface, really helps to shrink things down so that only your devices can go and access the services and the data that you're publishing out. Yeah, good one, Rich. Cheers.
Fantastic. Right, so one about Cisco here. So does SASE mean that we can get rid of our old Cisco VPN?
Go on, Adam, you can get that one.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, absolutely. So I showed the Global Protect client that we use. That's our preferred way to connect. That client, connects you into the SASE platform, so all your, secure your web traffic as well, but also provide that connectivity back to the data centers for those on-premise or your private cloud applications that typically people use a Cisco VPN for. So yes, with our Global Protect VPN, absolutely.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adam. I think there's one here which is crying out for a security SASE maturity workshop. Do we have to go all in when it comes to SASE, or can we do a soft start? We're quite a far way behind and don't really have a clue what cloud apps are sanctioned or tolerated. Yeah,
you're right there, Rich. I mean, we need to start out with some visibility. One of the ways that we can start with that is with our SASE maturity workshop. And we can have those discussions as to what the right elements of SASE are for you, what platforms we need to go and look at. As we discussed earlier, we really do see the Palo Alto platform as being the right one, being head and shoulders one above everyone else. But if we need to look at other organizations, other platforms as well, we can do that. And that's what the SASE maturity workshop is all about. So reach out to your account manager, and that's the place for us to start there.
Perfect, fantastic. So I've got one on authentication. What authentication mechanism is SASE compatible with?
Yeah, go on, if you want to take that one, Adam.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So probably whatever you're using today currently to authenticate users, whether that's Office 365, Okta, or there's a number of other ones out there that just slip my mind, Duo, things like that. We can use SAML, LDAP, Radius, use local database certificates. There's a lot of ways that we can authenticate them, and you're probably already using the method, something we are compatible with.
Yeah. I think one of the key bits there you mentioned, Adam, is SAML. Of course, if we can talk SAML, we can do passwordless authentication, what we might now refer to as phishing resistant authentication as well. So even if a user's username and password are intercepted, and even if they're on the phone to the threat actor, we can use the modern technologies to go and prevent that identity from truly being compromised. So yeah, really flexible stuff.
Excellent, fantastic. So I think that's all of the questions that we've had through. So just leaves us to say thank you very much. Thanks very much for your time. I appreciate that everybody post-pandemic has absolutely had webinar fatigue. So thanks for sticking with us. We hope you found something useful. This session has been recorded, so we will, over the next couple of days, go and upload that to our YouTube channel. But in the meantime, just keep safe, have a good day, and we look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all.